We're going to start with a loaded question.
Great.
How has your perspective on emotions shifted throughout your life?
Oh man. Well, I think when growing up, I grew up like really hyper conservative, religious Christian family where emotion was not something that I think we let run free. I think that emotion was something to be regarded as that I should put an asterisk with like a warning sign on any like emotion and process that through the lens of not just Christianity like as a whole, but as like our church, like what our church thought about real happiness or real sadness sort of thing. And then as that has, as I grew up and have largely stepped away from church, and even so much as stepped away from the concept of like Christianity as a religion, emotion has become something that I am like deeply protective of, in that like I want to pay attention. And honestly, through counseling and therapy too, for myself, of listening to my feelings and letting my feelings be something that I'm not going to let dictate my entire life, because I know that sometimes contrary action is what's important for me. I might not feel like getting up and moving around, but it's time to get up and move around. Or I might have a feeling that is scary and I need to get help for that scary feeling. But that I should listen to those things. They're part of me, and I think to like shove those things down is doing a disservice to myself. It's a long answer.
No, I mean, I think that makes so much sense. I mean, I can relate to that. I feel like similarly, growing up, I just sort of bucketed under evangelical because that's the best term I have for it. I feel like there was this sort of hyper rationality. It's interesting because I actually see it as like there's a form of atheistic scientific perspective which actually feels very similar to dogmatic Christianity to me, in
Sure.
that it's just this like very narrow, hyper literal, hyper rational way of being in the world. And I'm a rational person, I'm an intelligent person, all these things, but moving out of the confines of that very safe playground that you've been allowed to stay in, and for me, I think a big part of the conditioning was, this is the truth. This is big T truth. This is the way that we see things. This is what's right and wrong. This is the way to behave. And all of the other secondary and tertiary stuff that gets roped into that with holding hands leads to making babies and shame, right, and all this stuff,
Right.
And for me, one of the hard things inside of that was not only are my feelings kind of deemed irrelevant, they tend to clash with the narrative that I've been given, because
Sure.
I have a feeling that's like, oh, this doesn't feel respectful to me, but it feels like this is the way we treat people. So I guess I just ignore my feeling, or I feel probably a healthy, natural desire to connect with this person and talk to them and be curious, but like the you're a predator thing turns on or whatever else. And so it can create this sort of internal distrust where I would almost describe it as a psychosomatic dissonance. It's not just cognitive dissonance. It's like there's a disconnect between the story my mind's telling me and what my body's feeling in the moment, and having to go through the process of actually reintegrating those things. And to your point, the feeling is not always the singular North Star that makes the decision, right? But it's like it has to be integrated into that experience. And it's been really interesting for me as I've stepped into more of that process of sort of somatic integration, where it's like, man, I feel like I've started noticing all the ways that we show up and act that just aren't purely rational either, and it's like that actual importance of sensation and intuition and imagination towards our being as humans. And I've felt like it's been a really just like expansive experience, but it can also be a lot because, at least for me, it was like last year, I had a particular experience in therapy where I was kind of like going through it for a few hours, and I was talking to the guy, and I was like, I don't know like what's going on here. And he's like, well, you've been in your head for the better part of like 20 something years now, and like your body's kind of playing catch up. And it's like, man, I would love for that to not be true, but it does feel a little bit like you start falling through. I always use the metaphor of like, have you ever seen the Turn Down for What music video, the Lil Jon one?
Yeah.
Where they're just like going through floors in a building, and you're like, man, I hit the bottom of my sadness and my grief and my anger. And they're like, nope, psych, there's another floor that you're going to drop through here.
Right. Oh, man. Dude, that's such a... I've had a similar moment in therapy where... like I kept wondering, like, when will I have this like therapy breakthrough moment? You know, like other people, and he's like, you know, I hear stories about them, but when is mine? And there was a day where he was like asking me questions surrounding like my dad's passing, and kind of the months after where we, you know, moved from Florida to South Carolina to help help my family. And he was like, why did you feel like you needed to go there? You know, and I gave him this long answer about the familial logistics. And he was like, that's not what I'm asking you. He was like, stop telling me why on paper and tell me like why you, like he was pushing my buttons really hard. And I, you know, at some point I was like, I fucking had to. Like I fucking had, like screaming at him, and he was like, this is great.
Yeah.
This is, congratulations, you just experienced counseling.
Right.
Yeah, totally get it.
Right. But even that, like you're reintegrating that rational part of you that has a story, you know, right, with like your actual embodied experience. And maybe, you know, I don't know what your takeaway was, but sometimes it is like, I'm angry and I just fucking had to, but you're actually from that integrated place where like your body and your emotion and the logistics and the stories are all one thing again, as opposed to having this big disconnect where it's like, well, I secretly feel this way, but I'm telling this story. And I feel like that's been an interesting journey for me, is like, oh, it's not always all sunshine and rainbows and love and light. Like there is a lot of, for me, I would say that like one of the hardest emotions to allow has been anger. Like anger was such a thing that was just not accepted for me growing up. It was not accepted in the church. It was not accepted by my parents. We weren't allowed to watch shows where kids had bad attitudes.
Oh, right.
You know, all this sort
They're
of
rebellious.
stuff. Yeah, rebellious.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when my parents started separating and that stuff got super toxic, like I was angry at my dad a lot, and I would yell at my dad. And, you know, and that was a source of perceived disconnect in us for a long time. Now I'm kind of like, dude, if a 13-year-old told me that I was being a douche, I don't know that I'd take it that personally. Like that's a whole other like fascinating subset. But anger is the one that I feel like I've really had to like put a lot of time and attention into actually allowing. Like it's the easiest thing for me to just go like, you're irrelevant, you're irrelevant, you're irrelevant. And so, but I'm curious for you, like in that emotional reintegration, what have been the emotions that have been the scariest, the hardest to allow, or just like the ones that you've most gotten joy out of reintegrating?
Yeah. You know, like, that's tough. I was thinking about your note on anger, and anger for me is such a, anger is like a safety net for me, you know, where like, being an adult man, like anger is this like acceptable response where like sadness and hurt are not, you know, or they're like, I've even had family members who have been like, hey, like not right now, you know, like this isn't the place for you to be sad. Like, but no one is going to say that if you're like, pissed, you know, no one's like, hey, no, you can be mad later, you know, like, so like anger is this thing that's like been it feels so much safer than processing what my actual feelings are. And I think that I default to anger a lot because of that. And I've had to learn, just like you're talking about, these like integrations of all these different things of like, I've had to learn that I have like all of these scripts running in my head, and that like not all of them are what I think and feel, you know, like, and so like even, man, the things I feel like I've had to integrate are letting myself be heartbroken, you know, like, that, yeah, like letting myself acknowledge like something hurts a lot, and that because it hurts a lot, I need to sit in that hurt. Like I reference even for myself a lot. It's like weird you quote something to yourself, but like the Dune liturgy, you know, of like fear is the little death. But the thing that I bring up a lot in my own brain is like I will let it pass over and through me. And I now actively try to take that approach to, like, you know, like my dad died in 2016 in April. So I'm coming up now on what will be like 9 years. And I still have these moments where that grief is so palpable, you know, like, that I could tell you what the hospital room felt like the night that he passed, you know, the night before he passed. And I've learned now to integrate that feel, let it be, you know, let that feeling exist instead of being like just angry that my dad died, but to instead acknowledge like I'm still heartbroken and like that grief will always be with me. And I can let in each moment that it passes, you know, or each moment that it comes, to let it pass over and through me, you know, to not resist that feeling of heartbreak. Like, dude, my birthday is next week, and I have a voicemail on my phone that my dad left me to say happy birthday in like 2013. And like every year I listen to that voicemail on my birthday and cry my eyes out, you know, like, and that is like, I've learned that I can let that happen, you know, and like that each time it happens is healing. In that I integrate that feeling into me instead of like rejecting it and, you know, deciding that I'll just be angry or like rejectful of how that sits in my body. So yeah, dude, I think that's it. I think accepting heartbreak, because like I don't feel like the church wanted me to be heartbroken ever. You know, it was like, I've got a river of life flowing. You know, it's like there was never any like, hey, I'm actually not. There's not a river of life coming out of me.
Right.
I don't know why I picked that song, but
no, I feel that. Well, and I mean, I think that for me, that's sort of my systems level issue with my church experience, which was the first, 25 years of my life, is just like, to me, it felt like there was something chronic and fundamental to the system that we were just avoiding massive chunks of our own lives and each other's lives. And that it's like, we're going to show up on Sunday and we're going to, do the love and light thing. And we're going to, make small talk, and we're all secretly dying in one form or another on the inside. And then we get surprised when the next person who has been prompted to demigod status eventually blows up and their megachurch dies. And it's like, chronic repression's a hell of a drug, man, like,
yeah.
And I think, but that's one of the weird things that with all of this, right? That it's like, there's this tendency to separate ourselves from the darkness or the shadow or the emotional content. And it's like that separation is actually what seems to create more dysfunction than the integration of it does. And similarly, like as I've gone through, I feel like I heard so many times in my life, like, oh, you don't want to make emotional decisions. Oh, you don't want to be emotional. And as I've gone into new eras of life and new chapters and waded through things, it's like my perspective has mostly shifted to emotional decisions are my emotionally avoidant decisions. That it's like,
sure,
I don't want to be sad. I don't want this person to feel some kind of way about me or whatever else. So I'm going to just try to control the circumstance to avoid an emotional response. And so, to just get brutally up to date on that, it's like, that was such a big part of the decision to get divorced at the end of the day. It was like, man, this has really been not working out for either of us really well for a long time, but we're both playing this game of like, no one wants to say it, right? No one wants to go through the heartbreak. No one wants to go through the grief. No one wants to go through. And it's like, you break that seal, and it was the hardest words to ever let out of my mouth.
I'm sure. Right.
And then, all the emotions come up. And it's weird, that whole process too, where it was like the first like 2 months, I was just kind of swimming along, And then it's like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, January, it's like that's when the emotional spin cycle and all the grief started coming up for me.
Sure.
And really just sitting in that and spending a lot of time laying in bed, sitting with a journal, doing whatever. But even it was probably a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, it was after I got back from New Zealand. I'm laying in bed one night, jet lagged. It's 2 a.m. My eyes are closed. And for whatever reason, my system's just like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to relive the day you and Mandy met from start to finish.
Oh,
like the waking up in the morning, the going to get a burrito, the stopping at the costume store, going to a Halloween party. And it's like, one, I didn't know that I remembered all of this.
Right,
like that's one of the most fascinating things to me in that experience, where you're like, this emotion contains all this memory that I thought I didn't have.
Right.
And I'm just going to sit here for an hour and a half and be so grateful for all of it and bawl my eyes out again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, that is part of the thing. But that's one of the funny things, to the sort of, I would say, like Christian degree of separation from a large part of the experience and how that creates dysfunction. I've also found that, like, there have been times that I've shared my embodied emotional moments online in the last few months, partially because I feel like it was just such a taboo growing up. And I'm like, I would love to crack this taboo a little bit. But it's interesting to see people respond and go like, oh, you seem to not be doing well. And it's like, actually, I'm doing better than I have been. Yeah. Like, it's hard to explain that, like, actually feeling these things and sitting in this feels way better than just stuffing it all down. Yeah. And the vitality that comes out of it. Like, I had another experience back in June. I'd done some therapeutic substances in a guided setting and had this big, like, nervous system reset. I was just kind of like shaken for like an hour. And they were like, that's, the same things animals do when they go through traumatic situations, like your system's dumping stuff. But then I had this pit in my stomach after, and it was like just this weight and all this feeling. And I was kind of just belly aching about it. But it was interesting because I saw a few things in that moment. One of the interesting things about the perspective that you can gain, where I was like, my natural inclination is to hide when I'm in pain. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to choose to stay with people right now. I'm going to choose to be in pain with other people and to be seen being in pain. And then I'm going to get curious about what the pain is. And what came up for me was, this is the feeling that I felt when I was 14 and I told my dad that I wanted to kill myself and he walked away. And that feeling was so overwhelming to that 14-year-old version of me that I just fucking shut it off.
Yeah.
And that you just totally disassociated, did whatever else. And that actually, as much as it sucks to sit through that, something is coming back online. Some part of me, some part of my nervous system, whatever else, that has just been absolutely buried for the last however many years. And yeah, you're going to sit with it for a few hours and you're kind of going to feel like you're dying, and then it's going to be better. Yeah. But anyway, I feel like I'm kind of rambling here. I'm curious to get back to, like, sorry, whatever comes up for you.
No, that man, you got me. I thank you for sharing that, first off. I think that, man, there is this, like, there really is this challenging spot of, I feel that I was not allowed for most of my life to hurt around people. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason. And I don't have an explanation for that. But, like, I have felt that when I am hurting, I have to, like, hide to that same point. And it's even, like, as simple as, like, learning to skateboard in my 30s. I was like, I don't want to go do that at a place where people can see me learn. Like, there's this shameful feeling to me of even learning that, like, maybe it was the town that I grew up in, this kind of angry, like, bristly, blue collar town, that, like, learning a thing was, you should be ashamed of that, like, unless you're like, like a journeyman, like you're attached to some, like, incredible carpenter, and you're learning from him, but you shouldn't tell anybody you're learning. You should just learn it in silence. That, like, having having to basically relearn how to share my feelings with people. Even like you're just talking about, like this feeling that I was 14 and I said the hardest words I thought I could have said to somebody and they just abandoned me, you know, like, and then wanting them for the rest of your life to be like, nobody will ever fucking abandon me like that ever again, either because I'm not going to share it or because I'm not going to let them. And neither of those things like open us to like a fruitful life after the fact, you know, that like, the same way that like, you know, like my dad died and my body had this reaction. I was like, I'm never going to let this feeling happen to me again. Like, I'm like, as I process it, I'm like, I'm not going to let anybody else close to me die. Like, how do I do that? You know, like,
well, and then it becomes the implicit option is you just don't let anyone close to you anymore, right? Because it's like death's inevitable. So I guess we're just going to lock it all down again so that we don't go through that. Right.
I don't, you know, like that I was like distant to like our dog when we got the dog at the beginning, because I was like, this dog is, you know, I'm going to lose him at some point, and like the rest of the family is going to be distraught. I bet he can hear this. Dogs have great hearing. You're going to live forever. But, you know, like I wanted to, I knew the rest of the family was going to be distraught, and I wanted to be the one that was able to be strong. You know, like, and I had to talk to my therapist about that. I was like, I'm fighting the desire to love a dog, you know, because like, I don't want to lose him and be heartbroken. And then dude, just to have to acknowledge that like the ways that will have a fruitful life, it's basically like opening ourselves up to heartbreak and open ourselves up to isolation. And shit, man, like that's so hard.
Right.
That's so hard. Like, what are you going to do after that? Like, I'll never open up to someone ever again.
Well, and that's where you end up slowly building a prison for yourself, you know? And it's like, and there's a certain degree of temporary comfort in the prison, you could say. Like, there's a certain amount of safety and security. But at the end of the day, you know, to me, it comes back to the idea of just like playing not to lose. Like, yes, you can play a risk mitigated life. There's not a lot of life left in that, you know? And so it's like, it is courageous and vulnerable to show up and to risk rejection, to risk failure, to risk isolation, to risk being seen trying, to risk the feeling of heartbreak. But like, that is inherent to the experience of living. Right. And like, even being seen, you know, that I totally relate to the like being seen trying and learning thing. That's part of why I post myself singing on my stories. I have no illusions that I'm like an excellent singer. It is actually on purpose to go like, I want people to see, because I've been in the cage in the past of like, I've done really high level creative stuff. And I got to a point where I was like, unless we're doing $100,000 things, I'm not posting it. Right. And it's like, that becomes its own weird little prison, you know, where it's like everything has to be this, whatever it is. And so I feel like that's been a big part of the last 5 or 6 years of my life, has actually just been systematically deconstructing all of these little boxes and going like, I still have the ability to be happy and joyful. I still have the ability to execute on a really high level. And I have the ability to be the dude who's learning a new skill, and the ability, the dude who's going through heartbreak right now in the midst of separation, all of that. And one, I felt like that's been so life-giving to me. And there is a hope that it inspires someone else, because I didn't have that modeled for me. And it's like, the best thing I can do is put even just my little drop into the ocean of here's my story, and however many people see it, and maybe it causes them to reflect on something. Right.
Yeah, man, I think like, you know, not to be like some dude in my 30s complaining about social media, but like it is such a strange thing, you know, where like there is this almost at odds, this side that's like, I only show put together on social media. And then there's this other side that's like, I'm going to show you something that's closer to reality. And the people viewing those two things judge them against each other.
Mm-hmm.
instead of like, oh no, this is a person and this is a person and this is a, you know, like that, all those, I feel similarly about it in a way that I do about like personality tests. You know, like anytime anyone has ever asked me to take a personality test, I get so bristly. I'm like, you can't put me in a box. Like, how dare you? And then I read the results of it and I'm always like, yeah, that's, I'm in there somewhere for sure. But like, I had to take one the other day for this gig that I'm doing right now. And they were like, I told them, I was like, hey, forewarning. I was like, I don't agree with these things. I am a living, breathing human person, and I am capable of a full spectrum of emotion. And this personality test, it will give you a snapshot of that, but it's not the whole picture. And if you want to judge me by this, then maybe you and I shouldn't work together. Mm-hmm. But like, if you want to acknowledge that it is a snapshot, then we can like figure this thing out. So I don't know, man. I admire the idea of showing people that the process is challenging. Mm-hmm. And simultaneously, like, I would be horrified to have to sing in front of people. You know, like, I don't like my singing voice at all. So like, I think the fact that you're doing that for that intention is really cool. But if I start singing on the internet, know that I'm something weird occurring in my life.
I'm unwell. I know I had a friend, he called me a few weeks ago and he was like, dude, if you ever see me crying on Instagram, just like call the cops. He's like, something has gone horribly wrong. But I mean, and I think that's where both things, this is another, like, two things can be true perspective to me too, because it's like the process is challenging, and in the continual acceptance of the challenge of the process, it's sort of like the challenge of allowing the emotion, right? That it's like, I don't want to feel this come up. And then you accept and allow it. And it's like, it's just a feeling and it's going to go through and it's going to be okay. Right. I'm going to post something and some people are going to like it. Some people are going to think I'm brave. Some people are going to think I'm an idiot. Some people are going to think I'm self-absorbed, and it's going to blow away. Right. And it is kind of an exercise in detachment for me.
Because it's not about them.
Right. Exactly.
It's about you. And like, you know, if I were more intelligent and I had more to say about like the eccentricities of like social media as an expanse, like as an expression of someone's personality, like I think that how old are you?
31.
Okay. So I'm about to turn 37. So we're in that same range where we've like, it's been a part of our life, you know, since its inception.
Right.
Like there were plenty of parts of our lives that we didn't have it. So we're able to have both understandings. But like, I think that like there are some of us now that are understanding that social is a tool for self-expression, and it doesn't have to be anything other than a tool for self-expression. And it can be this tool for self-advertisement, and it can be a tool for both. That like, it is, you know, there are so many people that just feel like it has to be one thing or the other. And there's a new, we're not a new generation, but it's just like the next phase, I think, of people being on social media is the depth, like the true depth of conversation that people are willing to share and engage on social. And that to me is far more interesting than like how to sell a product.
Right.
Or, you know, but you know, to that whole marketing world, that I think that like when you can create a real conversation and it provides a service that people can like benefit from, that's when I'm like, this is why the internet exists. Right. You know, like 100%. This is at its best use. We're there.
Right.
So I don't know, man. Sometimes I'm like, I'm an old crotchety man who should stay away from social media. And then other times I'm like, so cool to get to see this moment, and hopefully it, builds up to something that we're all proud of and not just wish that it had never happened.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I mean, that's been something for me, you know, my whole professional journey has happened alongside social media and was a massive part of like early growth and connection for me, because I was in the middle of nowhere, had no experience, and like through Twitter and stuff was able to connect other filmmakers, ended up going to NAB. Like it really opened a lot of doors for me. But I've always been of the opinion that like my work life and my life are not fundamentally separate. And so like, I remember I used to have people would ask me, they're like, oh, you post personal stuff. Like, why don't you make a DP account and a U account? And I'm like, cause I just don't care to manage all of that. And like, if you're going to work with me, you're going to get me. So you might as well have some sort of sense of me in there. And so like, it's always been a connected thing to me, is like allowing all of those things, because to your point, it's like, I see it as a reflection. It's a self-expression tool. And like those self-expressions, some of them are going to land with people. Some of them are going to lead to work opportunities. Some of them are going to be whatever, you know, and like, that's all just a part of the space. But I am curious, like, cause I've gone through a few phases the last few years in my own relationship, both to social media and then how it applies into the work of what we're doing and how big social media has become in that. So I'm curious, like for you, how has your own emotional integration and just like shift in perspective changed your relationship to your creative projects, to client work, to personal work, to all of that?
Yeah. So I'm closing the door. My family's coming home. So I won't be surprised if my child runs in here.
Love it.
Yeah, me too, man. It's my favorite part of the day. I've been really trying to share recently, like things that are meaningful to me. And by that, I mean, I've had work situations in the past where they were like very controlling of our presence on social. And that was like, I was afraid of that. Like I was afraid of like posting something that felt like authentic to me, but that meant I was going to get fired. Like that was just kind of a weird, you know, like, I didn't understand how that was. And I get it. Like, you know, if you work at a place that has like some really hyper conservative culture rules and you posting outside of that, like, yeah, like social media kind of becomes a representation of you. And if you represent the company, then like, I get it. But it was like, hey, you can't post about these other brands. I was like, well, like, what if I own them? Like, I don't, you know, what if I have those products in my home? Like, I don't know. So
I always felt like, this is a quick tangent, but I've heard that I've not been on one of these, but I've heard that a lot of Nike sets, they make everyone show up in Nikes.
Dude.
They'll comp you to go get shoes. And I'm like, I get it. And it's also a little fucking goofy as hell. Like,
yeah. Dude, even so I used to do like one photo job a year for Nike, for like Nike track and field. And I showed up to my first one in Dunks because it was like before Dunks were super cool, you know, but like, I wish I'd kept them. Maybe I would be very rich today. But I showed up in Dunks and they were like, hey, we're glad those are Nikes, but like they need to be Nike running shoes. And I was like, why? Like, we're in the middle of nowhere. Like I have a giant's foot. You're not going to have Nike running shoes here that fit me. And so like I had to convince them to let me keep my shoes, you know, like
you just
like
go barefoot.
Right. They were that, you know, like they were that concerned that it was like a running shoe at a running event. But yeah, dude, they later, man, after the fact, they sent me this giant box full of Nike stuff. They're like, from now on, you'll have the ability to have a full Nike outfit, like anytime you show up for us. So I was like, I'll take it. Like, it's a cool move. But yeah, I've been trying to write a book for the last couple of years. And I finished
writing a book.
Yes. Yeah, I have been. And I finished the rough draft in August, last year. And I was like thrilled. I was so excited. I was like, here we go. But then like, you know, my experience at the CrossFit Games didn't, like, I was just grieving again after that. And I didn't want to open it up and like it just hurt too much then. And I haven't done it. I haven't gone back to my rough draft yet, but I will. But I've been trying to like share things that I'm writing on social, both for like the practice of writing and having it read and like getting, you know, some responses. And then also for just the practice of like, here's like a little piece of my heart that I just pulled out and typed it into my phone. And now it's in the world, you know, of like experiencing that vulnerability of like, hey, like my neighbor's dog died and I've cried for an hour, you know, or like I just buried a chicken that I didn't even really like, but like burying her is hard because I'm remembering burying my own dad, you know, like, so like I have been trying to be more authentic in the things that I share, but I fall in that same category as you're talking about, where I'm like, man, what if, what if some potential client is reading me post about dying chickens and they don't want me to advertise their product? I mean, that's a silly thought, first off. And secondly, if that's the case, like, so be it, you know, like I'm not going to make my life about positioning every aspect of my life to sell a product for someone, you know, like at some point in time, I'm going to have a life, you know, and I can kind of choose what it's like, not all the time, you know, but like in the moments where I have a say, I want to be a part of that decision. And hopefully, you know, if we're daydreaming about like creative work and how its implications on social, hopefully somebody's like, man, this guy cares a lot about telling a story. And they can read between the lines and see that. But if not, then it's like, maybe all that's going out into the world is that it's okay to have feelings. And if that's a win and I'll fucking take it all day. Dude, I'll take that as a win all day.
100%. And that's been very much my vibe the last, I would say, like year or two, with like teasing out, doing more, you know, I guess for lack of a better term, just like poetry and writing and music and all these things, has been that sense of like, one, it's practice. Two, it's practice being seen, which I think practice being seen is one of the least talked about skills. And I've always used the example that it's like, you know, people say, mumble rap, not talented, whatever. It's like, okay, you go stand on stage at the Super Bowl and do anything and don't turn into a puddle. Do anything. Like, even if you don't respect their craft, which I kind of think you should, but you don't have to, the ability to stand in front of 100,000 people and do something, if it feels goofy, is even harder, you know? And so it's like, that developing that skill of being able to like, I would love to do more. Like, I would love for this podcast to expand. I would love to get back into public speaking. I used to speak at a lot of conferences and stuff early in my career. And it's like, okay, I have to shake all that shit out of my system that's nervous about being seen doing any of this, because this is a part of the world that I inhabit. It's not the whole world I inhabit. It is a performance. It is a created moment, and it's something that I love. And so like, I'm going to go do improv for a year. I'm going to go sing and do poetry and just remove a lot of that subconscious shit that kind of keeps me gunked up. And to your point, I think that to the right people who will see it, you start to find opportunities for those things to now come together, you know, where it's like, for me, I've felt like practicing that sort of poetic original writing sense has been like, I'm really excited to actually work on scripted stuff again, because I have so much more confidence in my ability to actually write something that resonates. And that's a whole new skill that now I get to fold into what I do. And also, to echo your point, it's like, I'm a big believer in generally finding ways to have the things that I love provide value to the world, is sort of the way I would put it. And so it's like, I don't really separate work and life in that way, where it's like, if I can get revenue and provide value to people out of teaching things I love, having experiences I love, that's great. But the money professional side of it is still secondary to who I fundamentally am. And so it's like, it starts with like, what are the experiences I want to have? What do I care about? What am I curious about? And then based off of that, how can I bring that stuff out into the world in a way that allows people to connect with it? So I totally hear you there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so much of this too, this whole conversation is almost like, you know, like social has this ability to build an audience. And if you remove the word audience and call it a tribe, you know, like that, we can put things, you know, what's that quote? Like, your vibe attracts your tribe. So like, that we can put things out into the world and then surround ourselves. Like, you know, social is world shrinking, you know, the internet, like at its best, is world shrinking. And we can put things out into the world that attract people that are like us, you know, or that we want to be like, or that, like, from an idealist standpoint, you know, we can hope to become, sort of thing. So I think that like, I think about this a lot, that I think, and you and I have actually talked about it on socials before, but like we hope to like become the person that we needed when we were a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I still sometimes think if, 12-year-old me found me now on social, like what would he think?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he would be excited, like I think he'd be excited about like the blend of writing and creating and skateboarding and, being a dad on my close friends, side of the story. Like, that, I hope, and maybe that's like arrogant of me, but I hope that there are 12-year-old me's in the world that are able to find people that they can like look up to. And not that I'm a mentor in that regard, but just that like, oh, like I could also leave my small town and find a career in making things, like, because that didn't seem like an option where I grew up.
Right.
And it is now, it is for sure.
Right. Well, I think inside of that, it's like, influencer has become such a tainted term.
Right.
But the awareness that everyone is fundamentally a role model.
Right.
Like you're showing up and someone's seeing the example you're living. And hopefully you're seeing the example you're living,
right,
which is sort of where
right.
I come back to like, it's not another being caught in this trap of having to perform or create something, fabrication for others, but it's like, how can I live in the sense truest to myself, which is both now a model for myself, my younger self, my future self, and everyone else who's watching.
Right.
And I think that's, there's a Carl Jung quote in that world. I was actually just looking for another quote, but he was talking about basically how when people choose to step out of the cage, their actions end up influencing people you would not expect way more than their words ever will, basically.
Oh, okay.
And so like I can feel that where I remember the people even when I was growing up who I could see not quite inside the box of my perception. And it's like, they don't seem to have been struck by lightning lately. Like maybe the water is okay out there and maybe I can go try and explore that a little bit more. And I think that for me is also part of like the opportunity inside of social is to be honest, to be expressive, to be exploring, to be connecting in a way that helps us all continue to expand into this, safety with exploring all of that. But okay, so here's the quote. It's a Joseph Campbell quote, but he says, all compassion, all sympathy is irrational. Love is irrational. The rational is always stressing I-thou opposites. The mind is in the world of separateness and angular structures. It's a world put together in a way that can be calculated. Compassion and love, these jump mathematics. And for me, that comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning with actually the importance of feelings, emotions, intuition is like, I've at least been in the world where my internal narratives are running everything. And it's like, I have no business skateboarding. How does skateboarding contribute to my X, Y, and Z personal shareholder value? And it's like doing something for the experiential value of loving the experience is fundamentally irrational.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's part of why we're here, is like, to choose to love something is fundamentally irrational. And we can get so caught up in outcomes and leverage. And yes, we're all growing and part of the economy and whatever else. But like finding that ability to reconnect with the fact that like, I love the feeling of going for a ride or playing a game with my kids or whatever else it is like that. To me, that's the essence of life itself. And the other stuff is all kind of superfluous. But so I'm curious for you, like in that journey and now the journey of becoming a dad, like how is your perspective on love and how you spend your time and how you show up shifted as a dad now?
Oh man. I'm going to try to get into that from this story, but like there's this video that I watched to your exact point. She was like a veterinarian and she was doing like a Q&A. And this guy got up and asked like, hey, like, why does my dog hang its head out of the window in the car? Like, what is the point? Like, evolution? What? Evolutionarily?
Evolutionarily? Sure. Why not?
Sure. Okay. Evolutionarily, why does my dog hang its head out of the window of the car? And she was like, your dog hangs its head out of the window of the car. God, I'm getting choked up thinking about this. For the same reason that you got up to ask this question. She was like, he is having a blast. And like, you are here asking this question for the same adventure that your dog is hanging its head out of the car. That like, this is your life, you know, like, and you have chosen today to make something of it in the same way that your dog wants to make something of it, doing like 80 miles an hour down the, you know, a state road. It wants to sniff the wind and feel the wind in its ears, just like you want to get up and ask a question in front of your, you know, peers. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did. And, you know, I think that like, is it Will Smith? Oh, that's a weird Will Smith quote, but he was like, you know, might have a couple of good days and string them together and make a good life, you know, that like, yeah, like I might have no business skateboarding, but like my life is not a business and I don't want any part of my life to be like operated like a business, that there's like a line item attached to every aspect of my enjoyment, you know, like, I felt like church was that. I felt like church was requiring like, always be ready to give an account for the hope that is in you, you know, like, and like now I'm like, I'm not giving an account. Like I enjoy it and like, it hurts no one except my knees and my back to learn how to skateboard in my 30s. So like, I will be fucking skateboarding in my 30s because I'm having a good time. And I think like how that translates over into being a parent is like, I am regularly telling my daughter that it's okay to like a thing. You know, that she's like, Daddy, like, why are most Legos for boys? And being like, hey, I don't care who they're for. Like, they're not for boys. They are not for girls. If you like Legos, you like Legos, period. Mm-hmm. Or like, hey, like, Daddy, is it weird that I like to watch Ninja Turtles? Like, none of my other friends like Ninja Turtles. And I'm like, well, I don't care what any of your other friends like, you know, like, I am regularly trying to stand up for her to those uncertainties in her brain in a way that I would have wanted someone to stand up for me, you know, and instead of adding to the uncertainty, well, you know, maybe if you want to like things that your friends like, so they'll like you. I'm like, fuck that. Like, I want you to grow up and be as weird as you need to be to have had, you know, the depth and breadth of experience to get to grow up and be yourself, you know? So like, if you like Ninja Turtles, great. And if your little friends talk shit about the Ninja Turtles, then I will be Raphael, if that's what it takes. I will fight your little friends. Yeah. I won't fight your friends. It's not good for an adult to fight children. But like,
if you're in a costume, it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, is that the rule? All right, cool. Great.
That's how Spider-Man got away with it.
Great. I'll hit up Amazon really quick and I'll be the Florida man wears Ninja Turtles costume.
beats tweens in Raphael costume.
Right. Beats bullying tweens. Florida man attacks bullying tweens in Raphael costume. But yeah, man, I think it's just like holding space for her. Being like somebody who can defend the concept of being unique. Because I always felt unique and it felt like a weakness, you know, and if she can grow up feeling unique and feeling empowered in that, then like, man, I fucking did it, you know, like, right. Now, will I accomplish that easily? I don't know. But I'm going to keep my head out the window till we figure it out, you know? So right. Yeah, man, I don't know.
I love that. It's funny because that ties into, you know, you mentioned sort of evolutionary purpose at the beginning, and
evolutionary.
I've been listening a lot to the work of
that's the one. That's the word we need.
What it is.
Yeah,
evolutionary purpose. But I was listening to Ian McGilchrist a lot, and he was talking in a podcast the other day about beauty. And he's this guy, he has like a big neuroscience background and brain studies and all this stuff, but he's done a lot of work that bridges a lot of the human experience, I would say. And so he's talking about rationality and emotion and intuition and, you know, how these things play out in the world and art and creativity. And he was talking about beauty. And he was talking about how in The Origin of Species, I believe, Darwin says the word beauty on every other page on average. And that he's constantly referring back to the beauty of creation, the beauty of the unfolding of creation. And I think about that. I feel like we have culturally really lost the plot with this reductionist view of hyper optimized evolution, you know, that's like, well, what's the best content strategy or what's the best whatever? And it's like, nature's not out there trying to make the best bird. I hate to break it to you. Like, that's not the goal. It's not like, let's split test all these birds and then fuck all the lame birds and figure out what the best bird is. Like, that is not the mission. And so it is always changing, and it is changing in service of diversity, in service of uniqueness, in service of beauty. And these things are all functional and they're all part of ecosystems, and they are all entirely different and have different values and different modes of being. And that's like, when I look at that perspective on evolution, it's like, that's what we're participating in here. And that's part of when I say, you know, when I say death to certainty, it really has more to do with external certainty than anything. And coming back to that sense of like, you can be certain that there is no path other than your path. You can be certain that you will not fit into any fixed set of boxes. You can be certain that anything that you expect to happen may or may not happen. Like, this is all part of the mystery that we are living in. And the embracing your internal authority, your own sense of divergence, you know, is like the funny thing I was playing with in my mind the other day was this idea of like, you know, in science, they talk about standard deviations. And I was like, Challenger's the world where deviation is standard. It's like, you are here to deviate. You are not here to look at all your friends and go, I'm supposed to like the show that most of them look at. Like, we get conditioned into that, but that's not the game here. And so I just love, like, yes, it's like, you know, the emotion side, the felt side is part of what allows you also to do something different, because you're not pursuing the same linguistic rational flowchart that everyone else is to get to outcomes. You're incorporating your own experiences. You're incorporating your own tastes and preferences. And there's an interesting piece inside of that too, actually, where Ian talks about when you have an overactive left hemisphere of your brain, this sort of like more rational side of things, do you actually start losing the ability to differentiate subtle sort of qualitative differences and things. And so it comes back to this reductionist, like, well, a bagel is a bagel is a bagel kind of thing. And I feel like you see that so much on the internet these days too, where it's like lenses are all the same, lighting's all the same. And it's like, it's not, but you have to be willing to have a more nuanced conversation in here. But even experiencing a really excellent bagel is like, you have to be willing to feel it. You have to be willing to like experience it in your body, not just as a series of words in your mind. And that is part of a whole dimension of life that gets reintegrated as you reintegrate these feelings and you go through grieving and you go through all of that. And so for me, that's where it all starts to come back together, is like this emotional allowing, this reconnecting with sensation, this experiencing my grief allows me to experience life more fully. It allows me to see the range of colors. It allows me to create more beautifully. It allows me to validate the people around me in their deviation and their exploration and their path. And like, that's the most beautiful thing that I can ask for out of this. That's something that I've seen from you consistently over the years and just always been inspired by your sharing your fitness journey, your creative journey, your emotional journey, your dad journey. And I'm excited to see this next chapter for you. Like, I didn't even know about the book. The book is super exciting, you know, all sorts of other stuff shifting. So like, what does success look like for you moving forward from here? How are you measuring that? Or are you?
That's a great question. How is success, how are we managing success from here? Oh man, dude, that's an amazing thought. I think success from this point for me, if I remove finances, if I remove outcomes, success for me at this juncture is being able to make things that I care about. Like, and having those things become, you know, like, part of what provides for my family, and that might look like a lot of different things. I'm kicking around a lot of ideas of, I love getting to make things that get to exist in the world. Like designing shirts for me is so fun because like they're real, like they're piled up on my desk that are not like, it's not a video on my computer. It's like, that's a shirt. I could wear it, like I made it and it exists. So finding more ways to do that. That art festival I just got to be a part of was an incredible like adventure into that of like, I got to make a thing from my brain that became 3-dimensional, and then like 10,000 people walked by and interacted with it. And I got to watch them interact with it. That I think that for me will be a challenging KPI to manage and interact with. But one that is a worthwhile adventure is like, how can I continue to make things that bring joy and value to maybe just my life, and that's fine. But hopefully, joy and value to other people's lives as well. And then seeing where that takes us.